All right, everyone, let's get started. Let's jump into our first ever virtual adventure for kids through Yellowstone National Park. All right, so that's me jumping over the Yellowstone sign. I know I can jump really high, right? I am the president of Austin Adventures here. We are a tour operator. We're based in Montana, which is really close to Yellowstone National Park. It's my playground. And what does Austin Adventures do? We create vacations for people. It's really fun, all right? So I want all of you kids out there to think about a time you went on vacation. Maybe you had to help your parents figure out which hotels you were gonna stay in or which activities you were going to do. Maybe you wanted to go rafting or zip lining or go on a hike. You had to plan all that stuff out. Maybe you needed to figure out what restaurants you were gonna eat at or if you were gonna bring a picnic lunch for one day or something like that. So that's actually what we plan for people. We plan vacations, all right? And take care of all of those details for you. My dad, he actually started this business. Some of you might know him. His name is Dan, when I was 6 years old. So the same age as a lot of you on this webinar today. And I grew up going on Austin Adventures trips and getting to explore awesome national parks in person. And I've pretty much done every job here that there is to do, I think, at Austin Adventures. I started off when I was 6 years old, stuffing catalogs into envelopes for a whopping salary of $2 an hour. And I worked during all my summers from middle school through high school, answering phones at Austin Adventures, packing boxes of t-shirts and water bottles for all the guides, and going on a bunch of the trips, all that good stuff. Through my college years, I guided all through my college years. I still guide today. And now I just manage the day-to-day of the team and hire all of our awesome guides and train them. And we have a lot of fun, okay? So that's Austin Adventures. And my parents too, if you're wondering, they're still very much involved. My mom is in sales, Carol. Maybe you've talked to her at some point. Maybe your parents have talked to her at some point. And my dad is our CEO and founder, and he has a little hand in just about everything. That's Dan. So I just thought I'd ask, can you imagine what it would be like to work with your parents every day? I mean, okay, so maybe you do know at this point because a lot of you have been cooped up with your parents in the same place now for about a week. But that's pretty much my daily life. I work with them every day. It's great though, I love it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about why we're here today. So coronavirus, I'm sure all of you have heard of it at this point, is actually what helped create the idea of virtual adventures for kids. So this coronavirus pandemic, I'm sure your parents have probably talked to you about this already. It's a bit scary, it's a crazy time, but it's gonna pass, okay? It's gonna be okay. We're gonna make it through to the other side. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. And during all of this, I've just seen a lot of acts of kindness come up, and I really love seeing all of these cool different things popping up, these ideas, you know, virtual adventures for kids. But think about good things for you right now. You get a lot of extra family time, maybe. Your parents are home a lot more at this time. You get some cool new online learning activities, kind of like what we're doing right now. And since kids are out of school and many of your parents are working from home, so no one can spread the virus around, we just wanted to share these virtual online adventures for you so that you can enjoy exploring and learning from the safety of your own home, at least until we can travel again, right? So we're gonna be doing these virtual adventures most Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2:00 p.m. Eastern time. Next week, it's just gonna be Thursday because we need a little time to catch up on content and get ahead. So next Thursday, and then we'll start going into Tuesdays and Thursdays from that point on throughout however long this crisis lasts, okay? So we hope you'll join us weekly. All right, so what are we gonna cover? First of all, we are definitely going to cover Yellowstone. That is what this whole thing is about. We'll start off though by talking over what a national park is. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what a national park is. Maybe you've been to one before yourself, and what are they? Why do we have them? Why is Yellowstone so important? All that good stuff, okay? And next, we're gonna dive into Yellowstone National Park itself, specifically, and some of its neat history, and why it is so dang cool. I love this place, I can't wait to share it with you. And we're going to talk about the geology of Yellowstone and the fact that this national park is actually one giant volcano with lots of really cool geothermal features like geysers and hot springs. And finally, we're going to finish off with my favorite subject, wildlife, because who doesn't love animals, right? All right, so first, to get us all excited, let's watch a quick video of Yellowstone National Park.
Incredible.
Awesome. Who else is excited to visit a place like that virtually? I am. Woohoo! Let's do it. All right. So before we dive into learning about Yellowstone itself, let's just discover a few things about national parks in general, shall we? What are they and why do we have them? Cool. So first of all, what is a national park? I want you to think about the most beautiful place that you can imagine. All right. Maybe it's a mountain scene, maybe it's lakes, oceans, rivers, something along those lines. And I want you to think about a place as well that you've learned about in your social studies class or your history class. Maybe it is Mount Rushmore, Statue of Liberty, something like that. Okay. So a national park is an area that's really beautiful or historically important. Okay, it's land that's protected by the federal government for you to enjoy or to protect wildlife or both. All right. So there are 62 national parks in the United States. 62. You might want to remember that number, people. Can you think of any yourself? Maybe you've been to one? Any? Huh? All right. So a few classics that stick out in my brain are, of course, Yellowstone, Yosemite, Great Smoky Mountains, Grand Canyon, the Everglades. I'm sure you can think of more if you've been to one yourself. The federal government even just added another national park in December of 2019, and that one is White Sands National Park in New Mexico. All right. So we also have over 400 national park sites, is what they're called, in the United States. And these include our national parks, but they also include things like national forests, national battlefields, national historic sites, national memorials, national monuments, and many more. I'm not going to go into the difference between all of those different things because we're focusing on national parks right now. And it could literally take forever to go through 400 different sites. So we're going to stick to the 62 national parks today and call it good. All right, so why do we have national parks? We just talked about what a national park is, but why do we have them? Okay, so let's look at these pictures that are up on the screen. Can you imagine if everywhere you went looked like those bottom two pictures with the traffic, the roads, the refineries? Ick. I don't want to live in a place like that all the time. I want to be able to go explore and see these beautiful scenes that we're seeing up top here, right? So back to why we need national parks, okay? We need to preserve beautiful areas for everyone to enjoy now and in the future. Your parents, you, and your grandkids, you should all be preserving these areas for future generations to enjoy. We need to conserve our natural resources, like our forests, our clean water, our minerals, things like that. And, you know, if we use up all those resources, we can't get them back. So we do need to conserve those. And we need to protect habitat for wildlife so we can keep seeing bison, bears, wolves, otters, whales, seals, birds, all of those different things for a long time. And if we don't protect the land they live on now, they can't survive. And what would life be without animals? I don't even want to consider it. All right, so We talked a little bit about what and why for the national parks, but where are our national parks? So here's a map of the United States. So maybe you can take a look, you can find where you live on this map. I live in Montana, which is the 4th largest state in the United States, and it's right up there at the top of the map touching Canada. Maybe you can see it, it's labeled MT. And as you can see, we have 2 national parks where I'm from, Glacier and Yellowstone National Park. And I'm just wondering, have any of you been to national parks? I'm so curious. I wish some of you could talk. It's just me talking today though. You can talk to your family if they're there though. That's fine. All right, cool. So we're gonna start our first poll, okay? So I'm going to launch this thing and we'll go through it together. This should be up on your screen now. It's called the National Park Poll, and you can start answering questions as you'd like, but I'm just gonna read through the questions. So first one is gonna be true or false. National parks are only located in Montana. Is that true or false? Number 2 is how many national parks are there in the United States? Do we have 3? Do we have 25? Do we have 62? Or do we have 144? Just curious if you were listening. And then the third question is true or false? National parks were created to preserve beautiful areas, conserve natural resources, and protect habitat for wildlife. All right. Looks like a lot of you are answering right now. I'll let you finish up here. Gonna give you another 20 seconds or so. Ooh, lots of good answers coming in. Nice work, people. Awesome. All right, you got about 5 more seconds, and I'm gonna end the poll and share the results, all right? Now you're gonna be really familiar with how these work, so you know how the next 3 go, okay? All right, so I'm gonna end the poll now and share the results with all of you. So yeah, it looks like most people are answering these correct. National parks are located all across the United States, right? We talked a little bit about that. We showed the map with all of the different national parks everywhere. And how many national parks are there? Answer is 62. Nice job to those of you who are listening, especially when I said you might want to listen to this number and remember it, right? We have 62 national parks in the United States. And true or false, national parks were, of course, created to preserve, conserve, and protect. So nice job, everyone. I'm going to stop sharing these results, and we are going to move on. All right. So let's go on to our next section. That was the national park section. Now we're going to jump into my favorite place, Yellowstone. Awesome. All right, and we're going to learn a little bit about its history as well, which I really think is interesting. All right, so first of all, let's just jump into Yellowstone National Park, and we have our nice little map here, so you can take a look at what the national park itself looks like. It's that green spot on there. And basically, let's talk about where is it first, okay? We got 96% in Wyoming. So most of Yellowstone National Park is actually in the state of Wyoming. Even though Montanans like myself like to claim it, there's a lot more of this place in Wyoming than in Montana. There's only 3% of the park in Montana, all right, and 1% in Idaho. So it does cross state boundaries, all right? And how big is it? It is actually, for those of you from out east, you might have a better idea of this than I do since I'm from out west, but it is bigger than the states of Rhode Island and Delaware combined. So that's pretty crazy that Yellowstone National Park itself is bigger than a couple of our states combined. It's 2.2 million acres and about 63 miles north to south and 54 miles east to west. All right. So if we look at this map right here, we can see 5 different entrances. We have a north, a south, a west, an east, and a northeast entrance. So there's 5 different ways to get into the national park. And the road is shaped kind of like a number 8. I like to refer to the roads on this map as the upper loop and the lower loop. All right, you can kind of see how that looks like an 8 in there. So Old Faithful Geyser is located at the bottom of the loop, down there in the south, okay? So that's, Old Faithful is like, I don't know, one of the most famous geysers in the world, if not the most famous, right? So that's what a lot of people want to go to Yellowstone to see, is Old Faithful Geyser. And that big lake that you see on there, that blue spot, that is actually considered the highest alpine lake in North America, which means that it is the largest lake above 7,000 feet. Pretty cool, huh? All right, so let's dive into a little bit of history here. So first of all, it does need to be mentioned that Native Americans were the first people to reside in the Yellowstone area. And some of them lived in what is now Yellowstone. Some of them hunted there, some of them gathered there. There are 26 different tribes that are associated with Yellowstone in one way or another. So that's a very, very, very important part of Yellowstone's history. This is the very short version of history though, so we're not going to go too into detail today. All right, so fast forward to the 1800s, to the time when European Americans from the eastern US started exploring the western United States. So many of the people coming out west, they were pretty hardy mountain men. They were fur trappers, meaning that they were out west hunting and trapping animals and things like that. So basically they could send the furs from the animals back east to make into fashionable clothing, a scarf or a hat or what have you. And these fur trappers passed through Yellowstone during their travels and told stories to the people back home about Yellowstone. And you do need to remember that this was the time before Instagram, before Snapchat, before text messaging. They didn't have any cell phones at all. They couldn't even take pictures yet. So no one actually believed the stories that these mountain men told of water gushing up out of the ground or bison stampeding the plains as far as the eye could see. No one believed any of this. There was no way to bring back evidence. So these myths of a place called Wonderland were considered just that, myth. No one knew if this place was real or not. But then we first started having our first official scientific expeditions, arriving in the 1860s into Yellowstone. So perhaps the most important of these expeditions was the Hayden expedition of 1871, at least in my opinion. They brought along a painter named Thomas Moran and a photographer named William Henry Jackson. And their paintings and pictures that they took while they were on this expedition into Yellowstone were the pieces that convinced people back home that they, this amazing place called Yellowstone should become the world's first national park. All right, so that was really important that this expedition happened. All right, so Yellowstone became a national park in the year 1872, March 1st, 1872, all right? So why a national park and not a state park? I've had a lot of people ask me that. There weren't even states out west yet, only territories at this time. Montana didn't become a state until 1889, and Wyoming and Idaho soon followed in 1890, which means that Yellowstone became a national park about 17 years before we even had states out west. How crazy is that? And since this national park crossed boundaries into different territories, the Montana territory, the Wyoming territory, and one territory couldn't claim it for itself, it became a national park run by the federal government instead of a state park. Pretty cool, huh? And it was our very first national park in the world at that, right? Cool, so did you know that the US Army actually controlled operations in the park for the first 32 years of its existence? That's pretty wild, right? This was a time when there were very few visitors because of how tough it was out west. It was really hard to get out there. If you can imagine, most visitors actually had to take a train to get out from the east to the west, which took a few weeks in and of itself. And then once they got to the train station near Yellowstone, they had to jump out. They had to get into a stagecoach pulled by horses, and they had to take a tour by stagecoach around the park. And that in and of itself took 2 to 4 weeks. That was a long tour of Yellowstone. Not exactly the same as you and I jumping in a car to go see the park ourselves today. And then when your tour was done, you had to get back on the train and ride back out east. So a typical trip to Yellowstone in the late 1800s, early 1900s, before cars started coming into the park, took anywhere from 1 to 2 months. Can you imagine that long of a trip to a national park? That sounds amazing to me, but I don't think people have that much time anymore. Pretty cool. All right, so in 1916, it was decided that the Army shouldn't be running the national park anymore. They had kind of other things they needed to do, so they moved on. And this is when the National Park Service was created. All right, so if you go to a national park today, you'll see these really cool rangers wearing their brown or green uniforms, kind of like this, this colored picture on the right here. So these are our national park rangers, and they enforce the rules of the park and the safety of the visitors, and they're the ones in charge, right? I like this lady on the left here holding her hat in front of the stack of antlers. She is one of the original park rangers. So you can see just not much has changed from then till now, which is pretty cool. I love it. So the National Park Service's main mission is to preserve the national park for future generations to enjoy. And that means that if your parents went to Yellowstone as a kid, it should actually look and feel the same if they take you there someday. And someday when you have kids, Yellowstone should look and feel the same for your kids someday, and even your grandkids down the line. So really, we should all be experiencing the same thing no matter when we go to Yellowstone. All right, in Yellowstone now. So Yellowstone has changed in many ways over the years, but the most amazing thing about our world's first national park is that it actually really hasn't changed that much over the years. There's a few hotels, a few restaurants, some gift shops here and there, but overall, the park remains 99% undeveloped. And that's pretty cool to think that you could watch Old Faithful erupt this summer, let's say on a trip to Yellowstone, and it'll probably look the same for when your great-great-grandkids watch Old Faithful 100 years from now. How cool is that? That stuff blows my mind. I love it. All right, it's time for another poll, people. Let's pull it up. We got our check-in number 2 coming your way on Yellowstone history. Let me just see if I can get it going. All right, we are launching. Let's see you guys answer these questions. So number 1 is the majority of Yellowstone is located in, is it Idaho, Montana, or Wyoming? That was a long time ago in this session, but do you remember which one it was? Which state? All right, and number 2 is who were the first people to live in Yellowstone National Park? Was it tourists? Was it Native Americans? Or was it fur trappers? Who came first to Yellowstone? And number 3 is what year did Yellowstone become a national park? This one might be a little tough. That was also a while ago in this conversation. Was it the year 1500? Was it the year 1872? Was it the year 1925? Or most recently in 2008? Awesome, lots of votes coming in. Keep it up, people. Gonna give you about 20 more seconds. Lots of good answers coming in here. Awesome. All right, you have about 5 more seconds to get your votes in. Great work, people. And then I'm going to share the poll again. All right, so I'm going to end things now, and let's share the results. Okay, so it looks like we had a few different answers on the first one. Yellowstone is located mostly in Wyoming, in the state of Wyoming. I might have thrown you off a little bit with me being from Montana, but Wyoming, there's 96% there, all right? And the first people to live in Yellowstone National Park, while the fur trappers were there pretty early on, it was the Native Americans who were there first, okay? And what year did Yellowstone become a national park? Ooh, this one threw a few people off, it looks like. 1872. That was our world's first national park, was in that year, and that's before a lot of states were even states at that time. Awesome job, people. That looks great. So I'm going to stop sharing these results, X out of here, and we're going to move on to our next section, which is geology. Look at that beautiful hot spring. That's Morning Glory Pool. I love that one. All right, so what is geology? Geology is the study of the earth and what it's made of. That's the simple response. And geologists are the ones who study geology. So they're scientists who study rocks, minerals, fossils, landforms, and the layers of the Earth's surface. And there's a lot going on underneath our feet that we should probably be studying, right? And did you know, let's see if you knew this, that Yellowstone sits atop one of the world's largest active volcanoes? Ooh, this is getting exciting, right? But don't let that scare you away from visiting. It's not likely to erupt anytime while we're alive, okay? So I'm talking to all the parents and the grandparents in the room now, so who remember Mount St. Helens blowing up back in 1980? That was a pretty big explosion, right? A lot of you will remember when that happened, but that actually pales in comparison to Yellowstone's last eruption, which was 640,000 years ago. And that Yellowstone eruption was 1,000 times bigger than Mount St. Helens. Can you even imagine? That is so crazy to me. Anyway, back to Yellowstone sitting atop a giant active volcano. This actually is a good thing because we wouldn't have any of these really cool geysers and hot springs that you're seeing in this picture right now without the underground volcanic activity going on underneath our feet in this national park. All right, and we're just going to quickly cover this, but I just wanted to see if you knew what a caldera was. See that red line going around the screen on this map? That is a caldera, and that is the Yellowstone caldera in particular. So simply put, a caldera is a large hole in the ground. That's all it is, okay? So a big hole in the ground. So the last eruption that happened 640,000 years ago in Yellowstone left a huge hole in the ground after the volcanic eruption that happened there. And this hole is called a caldera. And the caldera is 30 by 45 miles wide, which is about the size of the state of Rhode Island. That's pretty massive for a caldera, right? All right, so let's move on to what in the world is a geothermal feature. That's a big couple of words there, right? And there are 4 different types of geothermal features in the park. And basically, this is a fancy word for all of the geysers, hot springs, mud pots, and fumaroles that you'll find there. So all of these features that I just named start off as the same thing underground, hot water. And by the time the hot water makes its way back up to the Earth's surface, it can take on the form of a geyser, a hot spring, a fumarole, or a mud pot. Those are our 4 different types, all right? And it just depends on the geography and the amount of water available as to which one will be which. So let's watch a few videos of these geothermal features together, and I'll explain what's going on with each one. Let's start with a geyser. All right, so this is actually Old Faithful herself in the Upper Geyser Basin, the most famous geyser in the world. And no, it's not the tallest or the biggest geyser, which a lot of people think. It's actually so famous because of how regularly it goes off, how faithful it is, all right? So it erupts about every 90 minutes. And I've seen Old Faithful geyser erupt hundreds of times, and I have yet to see it not erupt. She is very faithful. So Old Faithful is a pretty cool geyser. All right, let's go on to our next slide here. I really like this diagram, so I'm going to share it a few different times. And let's see, we're going to talk about geysers first. So I love this picture because it shows the 4 different geothermal features that are in Yellowstone. And you can see them all for yourself here and kind of how their underground plumbing systems work. So my first explanation about geysers is going to take a little bit longer than the others. So just bear with me for a second because I got to explain what's going on here, right? So what's happening with a geyser is that these little rain clouds over here on the right, they're raining, there's melting snow. It's moving down through lots of layers of porous rock. And the water sinks to a depth of nearly 10,000 feet before it comes into contact with heat from the magma chamber that's underneath Yellowstone. Very hot down there, woo! Don't want to be down there yourself, way too warm. So as the water heats up, it's rising this water to a temperature of 700 degrees. And do you remember what temperature water boils at sea level? 212 degrees, anyone? Does that ring a bell? So this water is rising to a temperature of 700 degrees, which is way hotter than normal boiling temperature. But the water itself doesn't boil. There's too much pressure pushing down from the rock layers above. So it's just getting really, really, really energized, and it needs to go somewhere, but it doesn't have anywhere to go. All right, so the only way it can go, it can't keep going down towards that hot rock. It's got to start going up. So that energized water is going to start going up, and it's going to start making its way through cracks in the rock. And kind of like if you pour water down like a pile of sand, that water takes the path of least resistance. That's kind of what's happening when it's going up as well. It's going to start following the same tracks, and it's going to create its own little plumbing system. So that's kind of what you're seeing in this picture right now, is the plumbing system that's under the ground under our feet in Yellowstone, okay? So in the case of a geyser, another critical thing happens, and the water reaches a really narrow constriction, right? So this narrow constriction creates a water traffic jam, and that water can't go anywhere. All right, so now that the water is near the surface, it's going to start wildly boiling. There's not as much pressure pushing down on it from above, and it's going to reach another critical pressure point where it just can't take it anymore. It's so energized and it needs to go somewhere that it's going to explode in the blink of an eye, and that is your geyser eruption right there, okay? So those are geysers, and that's how geysers work. Let's move on to hot springs, and we'll watch a video of what a hot spring looks like really quick. So this first one here, that's Morning Glory, one of my favorites. And that's just a short walk away from Old Faithful Geyser. And let's see, this big one right here is Grand Prismatic. And Grand Prismatic is actually the third largest hot spring in the world, and one of the most colorful as well. It's very famous, just like Old Faithful. And it's so deep that a 10-story building could actually fit inside this hot spring. Isn't that wild? I just think that's so cool. All right, so let's take a look at our hot spring next. So a hot spring has a very similar underground plumbing system to a geyser, but it's lacking one thing that a geyser has. Remember that little constriction that we saw? You can see it on the picture to the left that's not outlined in the box, that constricted pathway. A hot spring doesn't have one of those, and water is just allowed to freely flow to the surface, and the hot spring we see on top of the surface may boil or gently steam. It's not going to explode or anything like that. It's just nice and boily. It looks lovely to sit in, but it would be way too hot. And did you know that you can actually tell how hot a hot spring is by its color? The hottest hot springs are usually clear blue. That's because it's too hot for anything to survive. And the blue color you see is the natural color of deep water. So as you can see in these pictures over here to the left, that one in the bottom left-hand corner, that's probably the hottest hot spring in these four pictures because it is so bright blue in color, right? Nothing can survive in there. So at cooler temperatures, other heat-loving organisms, which are called thermophiles, there's another vocabulary word for you, they start to move in. So there might be yellow or orange or brown, teeny tiny little microorganisms living and absolutely thriving in this hot water. And sometimes the different colors can also be minerals like sulfur, which is yellow, or manganese, which is pink, or iron oxide, which is red. All right, so we're gonna move on to one of my favorites, which are mud pots. Let's watch a video. Sound for you. These guys are also some of the smelliest thermal features in the park. Yeah, you gotta plug your nose when you're walking by these bad boys. All right, so we got our handy little guy here again to show us what a mud pot is. So mud pots are sometimes called paint pots because of how colorful they are. And mud pots occur when there's a small amount of water and a small amount of hydrogen sulfide gas present. And hydrogen sulfide gas smells like rotten eggs. Ew, that's why these are so smelly. And some tiny little organisms, these little microorganisms that live in these areas, they actually like to snack on that hydrogen sulfide. They think it tastes good. You can't see them with your own eye. They're that small. You have to look at them under a microscope. And after they snack on this hydrogen sulfide, they're basically producing sulfuric acid as a byproduct. And the sulfuric acid dissolves the rock in the area into mud. And the result is a gooey mix that burps and bubbles. It's really fun to watch. All right, so that's your mud pots. We're gonna go into the final geothermal feature, which is a fumarole, and we'll watch this video really quick. So these guys are going to be fuming and hissing. So if you hear kind of a loud noise when you're going through the park, these guys, they're basically just a bunch of steam, which is really cool to see. Okay. So we have our fourth kind of geothermal feature here, which is the fumarole, and these are also known as steam vents, okay? So a fumarole is actually the hottest of all the features, even hotter than the boiling water of a hot spring. The hottest fumarole in Yellowstone has been measured at almost 300 degrees Fahrenheit. You would not want to put your hand in front of that steam vent. It would burn you. Would not recommend. So in the case of fumaroles, the water supply is so limited that what little of it there is boils away before it even reaches the surface of the earth, all right? And typically, these features make roaring or hissing sounds because you can hear the steam that's coming up, rushing up through the underground plumbing system. All right, we've reached the end of our geology section. Let's launch another poll. All right, I'm gonna find number 3, which is our geology poll, and we are going to launch. So go ahead and start answering questions. I'll read them out loud to you as well. So number 1 is true or false. Geology is the study of wildlife. Okay. Number 2 is, what do you call a giant hole in the ground left behind after a volcanic eruption? Is it a volcano? Is it magma? Is it a caldera? Or is it a geothermal feature? Trying to be a little tricky here. I see a lot of people changing answers from one to another right now. And which of the following is not a geothermal feature? Let's see, is it not a hot spring, not a fumarole, not a mud pot, not a volcano, or not a geyser? So which one of those is not a geothermal feature we just talked about? There's 4 different types, if you remember, okay? These ones are a little tricky. There's some big terminology being thrown around in this section, but I'm confident you guys got this. Doing awesome. All right, I'll give you about 15 more seconds. We're about to move on to my favorite section, which is the wildlife section. Oh boy. Awesome. All right, it looks like most of our answers are in. I'm going to end the poll and share the results with you. So we have geology is the study of wildlife. That is false. Geology is the study of the earth, right? And everything that's underneath our feet, all of those landforms you're seeing, that kind of thing. Biology is the study of life, I guess, and wildlife. So that is a little bit different, okay? So what do you call a giant hole in the ground left behind after a volcanic eruption? The answer to that one is a caldera. A caldera is a giant hole in the ground. And which of the following is not a geothermal feature? We talked about geysers, we talked about hot springs, we talked about mud pots, we talked about fumaroles. A volcano is not a geothermal feature. Nice job, everyone. All right, so let's stop sharing these results, X out of here, and keep moving. So let's dive into my favorite subject, which is wildlife. I bet a lot of you are on the same page as me here. There's a bison walking through a geothermal basin here. That's pretty cool. All right, so let's get a little bit more excited by watching a video on wildlife. told you the famous bison hat was gonna come out at some point. All right, and lucky for you, you get to watch me wear bison hat for the rest of this presentation. I know you guys are excited, so. All right, so these are some of the animals of Yellowstone right here. I just wanted to go over some of my favorites in the park. We could literally spend all day going through some of the 60+ mammals that call Yellowstone home, or the 300+ bird species that reside in the park, but we don't really have time for that, so I'm going to share with you a few of my favorite animals and how to identify each. Just notice my horn's a little wonky here. It's seen better days. All right, so let's start with one of my favorites, which is bears. And I think I want to start off with this one because this is what a lot of people want to see when they go into Yellowstone National Park, right? So we have two different types of bears in the park. We have grizzly bears and we have black bears. And this is a great identification chart for showing the differences between the two. I love this chart. And let's just take a minute to go through the differences. So I should start off by mentioning one difference that you can't count on, and that is the color of the bear. That's a big misconception, is that you can see a black bear and see that it's black, so it must be a black bear. That's not always true. I've seen black bears that are brown and sometimes almost white. That's called more of a cinnamon black bear is what that's called. And I've seen grizzly bears that are very, very dark in color. So you can't always count on the color, unfortunately. So the best way, in my opinion, to tell these different bears apart is actually by their shoulder hump. So if they have a shoulder hump right here between their shoulders, that's a grizzly bear. So you can see in this picture that that big bear right there has a big old shoulder hump. That's because it has to have really strong shoulders for all the digging it does through different grubs and trees and things like that for getting its meals. It likes to eat bugs, all right? So if you don't see a shoulder hump, like you don't see one on that black bear right there, then it's probably a black bear, okay? And then other ways to tell the difference are if you're looking at the bear from the side by the profile of the face. So on a black bear, the face kind of just goes straight down, whereas on a grizzly bear, it comes in and then goes out, okay? So that's called a dished in face on a grizzly bear. You can see how different they look in these two pictures. And also the ears on the grizzly bear, they have short little round ears that are really close to their head. And the black bears, they almost look comical. Their ears are so long and narrow, okay? So that's another way to tell. And then hopefully you're not so close that you can tell the difference between the two because of the bear's claws. Ooh, yeah, you don't want to be that close, okay? So be looking for that shoulder hump for the grizzly bear. That's a big telltale sign. All right, let's move on to some canines. Canines are also known as dogs, as I'm sure a lot of you already know. And I don't know about you, but I am a serious lover of dogs. I have my own black lab at home named Bruno Mars. And dogs of Yellowstone, the canines of Yellowstone, are very near and dear to my heart. I love going into Lamar Valley in the morning and watching wolves. It is so cool. So I hope that all of you have that experience someday if you haven't done it already. So now as for telling these three different canines apart, it can be kind of tough actually. Sometimes I even get confused, and I've seen many wolves and many coyotes in my day. Foxes are probably the easiest of the three to tell apart as they're the smallest and they appear reddish or brown in color. And really they got a big bushy tail. They're a little bit easier to tell apart from the coyotes and the wolves. The coyotes and wolves, on the other hand, are much more difficult to tell the difference between the two because they look very similar in the wild. And as I said, I even get mixed up sometimes. I see a lot of people getting mixed up as to which is which because the coyotes, especially in Yellowstone and out in the West, are huge. So they almost look like wolves. Some of the main differences, wolves actually range in color. They can be anywhere between light or gray, that's the most common color, to white sometimes, or even black, whereas coyotes are usually more of a light gray or brown, okay? And wolves are much bigger than coyotes, as you can see from the size comparison chart. However, if they're not standing next to each other in the wild, which they usually aren't, it's kind of hard to tell this difference apart. So I think the best way to tell the two apart, if you're close enough or if you're looking through binoculars or something like that, is to look at the head. And wolves have a pretty wide snout and rounded ears, while coyotes have a tall pointy ears and a long, narrow snout. And snout is their nose, okay? So you can see on there, especially in this wolf and coyote comparison chart, a little bit of difference between the two. And also, if you're just in the wild, you can watch their behavior. Wolves are pack animals. They hang out in packs, they hunt in packs, they raise their pups in packs. So there's only about 100 wolves located in Yellowstone, and they require a lot of space to roam and hunt, okay? So you kind of know where to start looking for them if you've been in the park or talked to a park ranger who can tell you where to look for them. Whereas coyotes are much more solitary, and they're often seen on their own or maybe in pairs, and they're considered very common in Yellowstone. All right. So let's listen really quickly to some wolves howling. This is cool. Awesome. I love that sound. It's so eerie when you're in the wild and you can feel your neck hairs standing up on edge. Oof. Very cool. All right. Now let's talk about the wild cats of Yellowstone. We're getting close to the end here, people. The wild cats of Yellowstone are really cool, but rarely seen, okay? So you will not ever mistake a mountain lion, also known as a cougar, if you're ever lucky enough to see one in the wild. An adult mountain lion is really big, and they have a long tail, especially compared to a bobcat or a lynx, which have pretty short tails, like in this picture is showing you. And there's only thought to be around 25 to 35 mountain lions living in Yellowstone, mostly in the northern side of the park. I've never seen one in Yellowstone before, and I very highly doubt you will either. They're way back there in the backcountry. They don't like to hang around people. Bobcats and Canada lynx also both live in the park, but they're also very seldom seen, even more rare oftentimes than mountain lions. In fact, with the Canada lynx, there's only been 112 confirmed sightings in the history of the entire park. So those guys really aren't seen very often. But the best way to tell if you're seeing a Canada lynx is those little ear tufts. See those guys right there? The little ear tufts? And the bobcat usually has more prominent markings on its body, like those spots that you're seeing, okay? And last but not least, the ungulates of Yellowstone. So what is an ungulate, you might ask? It's kind of a fun word. A mammal with hooves is what an ungulate is, all right? So all of the animals on this slide have hoofed feet, and there's 7 different types of ungulates in Yellowstone. There's moose, bison, elk, bighorn sheep, deer, mountain goats, and pronghorn, all right? So there's a lot I could cover in depth for all of these animals, but for the sake of time, we're just gonna do that another day. So what I will leave you with, now that we're coming to an end on our section of wildlife, is that whenever you go to Yellowstone, you should always pay attention to the rules when it comes to the wildlife. So most of these wild animals need 25 yards of space, and you need to put 100 yards between yourself and a bear or a wolf. And 100 yards is the length of a football field, all right? So that is a long distance away if you can picture what that looks like. And with kids on my trips, I actually like to use what I call the golden rule of thumb. And that is, you can test this out with someone in your room perhaps, or an object. You put your thumb out like this, and you close one eye, your arm should be straight, and you put it over the object that you're looking at from across the room. And if your thumb covers the object, that means that you're far enough away. If there's parts of the object you're looking at sticking out on either side of your thumb, that means you are too close, okay? So that means you need to back up if you're close to an animal that you should be further away from, all right? And one other tip I always give the kids on our trips, it's really easy to get excited and so stoked when you see a bear or a wolf or a moose for the first time, but you actually want to kind of keep the volume level down, right? We don't want to scare these animals in their natural habitat. So we do a lot of excited whispering and things like that when we see these things on our trips. But for the most part, you just want to keep quiet and observe nice and peacefully, okay? So you don't scare these animals. And it's always helpful too, to be able to bring a pair of binoculars with you, right? So always bring some of those if you go to a place like Yellowstone so that you can watch animals from further away at a safe distance. All right, and we have reached our final check-in here. So I am going to launch our last poll, which is our wildlife poll. And let's go through these together. So if you see a bear in Yellowstone and it has a big hump between its shoulders, is it a black bear or is it a grizzly bear? All right. And the second question is, which of the following is not an ungulate, which is a hoofed animal? Is it a bison, a wolf, a deer, or a mountain goat? An ungulate. And the third is, what is a safe distance away to look at bears in Yellowstone? Is it 10 feet, 100 yards, or 1 mile? Lots of good answers coming in here. Nice job, people. Keep it up. All right, I'm gonna end the voting here in about 10 seconds. We're getting pretty good at this now. Lots of answers coming in quick. Awesome, all right, I'm gonna end the polling. Nice job, everyone. I'll share the results here with everyone. And it looks like most of you got it right, that grizzly bear is the one with the big hump between its shoulders. That's an important distinction that you want to be able to tell if you're hiking around in Yellowstone, all right? And the only animal out of this list that is not an ungulate is a wolf. Nice job there. And a safe distance away to look at bears in Yellowstone is 100 yards, the length of a football field, right? Definitely don't want to be 10 feet away. That's way too close. And while a mile would be okay, that's almost too far to even see the bear, right? So you can get a little bit closer. 100 yards is a good distance. So I'm going to stop sharing our results right now and going to close out of this window and keep moving on. All right, everyone, we have made it into the question and answer period. So I'm going to pull up the questions here and just take a look and see what we got going on. Oh, wow, there are a lot of good comments in here. Nice. Okay. So we got, okay, so let's start with this one. Are the national parks open for visitors right now? It's a good question. Well, it kind of depends. All the national parks are different, but right now they are not open in Yellowstone for visitors because of coronavirus. So they actually closed the gates and they'll be opening them back up when they think it's safer. They just don't want to overload those small towns at the borders or anything like that with sick people. So they did close down the borders, but they should be opening back up hopefully in May, but we will see what happens, right? And someone asked, I like this question by Logan, would you die if you put your hand in a steam vent? No, I don't think you would die, but you definitely would get burned and it would really, really hurt. You'd probably have to go to a burn and trauma center to get your hand treated. So, and there is actually a book called Death in Yellowstone. It has all sorts of ways that people have died in the park. So you really do want to be careful because there's a section on people falling into hot springs, which is really scary. Like, just stay away, don't do it, okay? So we don't want to get close to any of that kind of thing. All right, so let's see. What else do we have? We have, let's see, what is your favorite animal? That's a good one. My favorite animal is actually a moose. Sorry, Bison Hat, don't listen, but I love moose. They're so fun. And are there any canyons in the park from Michelle? That's a good one. Yes, there is a giant canyon in the park called the Grand Canyon of Yellowstone, which is really, really cool. And that one is pretty, very pretty. It's about 20 miles long, and in my opinion, almost more pretty than the Grand Canyon itself. Oh my gosh, did I just say that? Totally worth it. You definitely want to go see some of those other features other than Old Faithful while you're in the park, okay? Cool. I think one of these pictures actually on here has some Grand Canyon stuff. All right, and what else do we have? Can you swim in the hot springs? That's a good question. While this hot spring on the screen right now looks amazing, probably not. You don't want to go in there. It's 199 degrees. So I'm going to say absolutely not. That would burn you. That's not good. But there are a couple of places actually in Yellowstone where you can swim, and that is in the Boiling River. That's where a hot spring pours into a national park on the northern side of the park. And also the Firehole River allows swimmers as well. And that's where the water is raised, the temperature of the water is raised, where lots of different hot springs pour into the water before the river comes downstream. So that's a good place to swim as well, I guess. Good question. Ooh, Nina has a good question. When is the best time to see wolves in Yellowstone? So I think with that, I would say really anytime. You just want to go in the morning or in the evening, dawn or dusk, okay? And I mean, my favorite personal time to go see wolves, I think it's the easiest, is in the winter. There's not a lot of park open. Yellowstone just closes down in the winter for the most part, but they do leave the northern side open for people to get in and out from the tiny little town of Cook City, which is at the northeast entrance. And it's really a lot easier to see the wolves standing against the snow in the wintertime. So I really like going in the winter. That's what my husband and I do together. And that's really cool. But you can see them in the summer, you can see them in the fall or the spring. Just totally depends on when you go. Oh my gosh, you guys have so many awesome questions. I don't think I'm going to get through all of these. Let's see. Are you guys running trips to Yellowstone this summer? Yes, we are. Everything, is a little bit up in the air with this coronavirus pandemic going on, but assuming the national parks are open, we will be running trips. So I hope to see some of you in Yellowstone this summer. That would be awesome. Or, next summer too, whatever works. All right. And how many geysers are there in Yellowstone? That's from Michelle. That's actually over 300 in the park. There's many more located in the world, but there are, like 300 in the Upper Geyser Basin. There's about 600 in the whole park, which is pretty amazing. So lots of different places to go see them, some with a ton of people, like in the Old Faithful area, and others maybe not as close. And places where you can definitely get away from people too, okay? Oh my gosh, there's some pretty crazy questions in here. Oh my God, I love some of these. These are so fun. Let's see. Cool. What is my favorite thing in Yellowstone, from Julia? All right, I think this is going to be the last question I answer for right now, so we can keep moving on along with this presentation. But my favorite thing in Yellowstone is, I'm gonna have to say Lamar Valley. Lamar Valley, where all these cool animals are located. That's where their hangout is. And that's where I like to go hang out in the winter time, where there's not a lot of people hanging out in Yellowstone. And yeah, Lamar Valley is probably one of my favorite things in Yellowstone. It's really cool. Oh, here's a great picture of Yellowstone in the winter right here. How fun would it be? You have to take a snow coach in to get in the winter, which is awesome. And yeah, it's pretty wild. You can't just get there by car in the wintertime. But all of these cool hot springs are still out because snow doesn't, it's going to melt when it lands on the hot springs, so you can still see them and everything. All right. And we have a bison here, and we are getting through to our last slide. All right, and thank you so much for all these questions. If you do have any more and you are dying to get them answered, please feel free to reach out to me through email after this presentation. There's just so many, and I want to make sure that you guys can go on with your days as well. We've already been on here for a while, and I'm so appreciative of all of you who stuck through it to the end. And thank you so much for joining us on our first ever virtual adventure. It's been really fun. And guess what? We already have our next destination picked out, and we are going to Alaska next Thursday, okay? So if you've ever wanted to join us, or if you've ever wanted to explore the land up north and explore more of the land of the midnight sun, then you should definitely come to Alaska with us next week, okay? So if you liked this webinar, the next one is gonna be pretty similar, except this was the first one we ever did, so it's a little bit crazy. I'm sure we have a lot to learn and a lot of things that will change for next time as well. So please check out our Virtual Adventures for Kids page. It's on our website. You can go to the link that's on this page, or you can go to the Virtual Austin Adventures website through just going to the Austin Adventures homepage and clicking on the first banner that comes up, okay? And if you need anything further, or if you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can give me a call, you can reach out to my email, like I said, or if you have any ideas too on where you want these virtual adventures to go in the future, we would love to hear those ideas, okay? This is something that we're considering more of a long-term thing. So we want your ideas. We want to see where you guys want to go. And as for my closing comments, again, thank you so much to everyone for joining. This has seriously been so much fun. I don't know about you guys. I'm over here talking by myself and acting like a crazy person with my bison hat on, but I've really been having a lot of fun. Hope you guys have been too. And I know that this whole coronavirus thing has really made life a little bit crazy for everyone, but I hope that you walked away from this virtual adventure having had some fun and having learned a few things about Yellowstone. And maybe you're so curious and excited about Yellowstone that you'll want to go there yourself one day if you haven't gotten to go. And, if you ever need help planning a vacation, you know who to call, right? Austin Adventures or me, I can help you plan something, okay? And I hope that I've inspired you to want to explore more and learn more about our national parks, which are very near and dear to my heart. They are such a cool part of the United States. And, we have national parks all over the world. So maybe you'll make it a goal someday to visit all of them. I think that would be pretty cool. So yeah, I can't wait to see you all virtually in Alaska next Thursday. And thank you so much for joining. Bye, everyone.